He was already dead. 2 spears through his chest. Blood pouring into the snow. His men had watched him fall. And then Bjorn Ironside stood up. Not slowly. Not stumbling. He stood up, grabbed his sword, mounted his horse, and rode into battle one final time. His enemies saw a dead man coming for them. And they broke. An entire army, thousands of warriors, turned and fled from a man with 2 spears still in his body. How? This is not a legend. This is not a myth. This happened. And by the time we're done, you will understand why. Bjorn Ironside was not just the greatest Viking warrior who ever lived. He was something the ancient world had no word for. Let's go back to the beginning. To understand what happened at Bjorn's final battle, you first need to understand what kind of man he was. Because Bjorn Ironside did not become a legend at the end of his life. He was born into one. His father was Ragnar Lothbrok. The name alone should tell you everything. Ragnar, the man who raided Paris. Twice. The man who died in a snake pit in England. And whose death cry was, "How the little piglets would grunt if they knew what the old boar suffers." That was Bjorn's father. And Bjorn watched him die. He was a boy when Ragnar sailed to England for the last time. A boy when the news came back that his father was gone. That King Aelle of Northumbria had thrown Ragnar into a pit of venomous snakes. Most sons would have wept. Bjorn Ironside did something different. He made a promise. And then he spent the next 20 years becoming the kind of man who could keep it. The training started before he could properly hold a sword. Viking warrior culture was not a weekend hobby. It was a complete life system, physical, psychological, spiritual, designed to produce human beings capable of things that would seem impossible to anyone raised differently. By the time a Viking boy was 12, he could row for 8 hours without stopping. By 15, he was expected to fight in a shield wall, the terrifying Norse battle formation where men locked their shields together into a moving wall of wood and iron and advanced into spear fire. The shield wall was not just a tactic. It was a psychological test. Because the shield wall only works if every man holds. One man breaks, the wall breaks. The wall breaks, everyone dies. So you trained until holding was more instinctive than running. Until the fear of letting your brothers down was bigger than the fear of the axe coming for your face. Bjorn trained in this system from childhood, and he was exceptional in it. The sagas, the Norse historical accounts, written generations later, but drawing on oral traditions much older, describe Bjorn as physically enormous, powerful in a way that distinguished him, even among men selected for physical capability. But size was not his defining quality. His defining quality was his mind. Bjorn understood something about warfare that most warriors never grasped. Violence was the last option, not the first. His greatest military achievement was not a battle. It was a deception so audacious, so coldly brilliant, that it reads like something from a spy novel rather than a Viking saga. The year is approximately 859 AD. Bjorn and his blood brother Hastion lead a fleet of 62 longships out of the Norse heartland and into the Mediterranean Sea. 62 ships, thousands of warriors. Their target, Rome. Not raid Rome, not attack Rome. Sack Rome, the eternal city, the center of the Christian world. The greatest prize any Viking could imagine bringing home. They sailed down the coast of France. They raided Spain. They entered the Mediterranean waters that Norse ships had almost never navigated before. And they kept going. Then they saw a city, a beautiful city, white walls, cathedral towers, rich harbor, protected by walls they could not easily breach. One of the men said, "That must be Rome." It wasn't. It was Luna, a city in northern Italy. But Bjorn didn't correct anyone. He had a better idea. He sent a messenger to the city under a white flag. The message: Bjorn Ironside, the great Viking raider, was dying. He had converted to Christianity on his deathbed. His final wish was to receive the last rites inside a Christian church. The Bishop of Luna agreed. Of course he agreed. A dying Viking chieftain converting to Christianity? This was a gift from God, a triumph of the faith. They opened the gates. Bjorn's men carried him inside on a stretcher. Pale, still, eyes closed. The funeral rites began. And then Bjorn sat up. He drew his sword. His pallbearers, armed Vikings hidden under their cloaks, drew their weapons simultaneously. The gates of Luna were still open. The rest of the fleet was waiting. Luna never had a chance. They stripped it completely. Every piece of gold, every piece of silver, every valuable object in the city and the cathedral. And they sailed away. The story traveled across Europe in weeks. Not because of the raid itself, Vikings raided cities constantly, but because of the audacity of it. Because Bjorn Ironside had walked into a fortified city, by pretending to be dead, and walked out richer than a king. But that was not his final battle. His final battle was different. His final battle was not about gold. It was about something the Vikings understood better than any other culture. In the ancient world, something they had built their entire civilization around. How a man dies. The year is approximately 865 AD. Bjorn's father Ragnar has been dead for years. The debt is still unpaid. Bjorn, now in his 40s, a king in his own right, father of children, ruler of a land, assembles the largest Viking force ever seen. The sagas call it the Great Heathen Army. And the name is not an exaggeration. Thousands of warriors, from every corner of the Norse world, sons of men who had sailed with Ragnar, brothers of men who had died with Ragnar, men who had heard the story of the snake pit, and had been waiting for this moment their entire lives. They crossed the sea to England. Their target, King Aelle of Northumbria, the man who killed Ragnar. They don't just want to defeat him. They want something specific. They want the blood eagle. The blood eagle was the most extreme execution in the Viking world, a ritual killing reserved for the worst enemies, carried out in the name of Odin himself. The victim's ribs were cut from the spine and pulled outward like wings. The lungs pulled out while still breathing. It was not just an execution. It was a message to every king in England. We remember. We always come back. And we always collect. They found Aelle. They collected. But Bjorn's war did not end with Aelle's death. Because the English kings had formed alliances. Because the Great Heathen Army, for all its power, was operating deep in foreign territory. And because, eventually, a man arrives who is capable of stopping them. His name is Harold. The details vary depending on which saga you read. The Norse and Anglo-Saxon sources don't always agree on specifics. But what all sources agree on is this. Bjorn Ironside fought his final battle outnumbered. His army had been campaigning for years. The men were tired. Resources were stretched thin. The enemy knew the terrain and Bjorn didn't. The battle begins badly. The Viking line holds because Viking lines always held. The shield wall does its work. But the numbers are wrong. And then Bjorn takes 2 spears. Both land center mass. He goes down. His men see it happen. A sound goes through the Viking line. Not a scream, not a cry, something deeper than that. Something that happens in the gut. The sound of men who believe they have just watched their leader die. Here is where history becomes something else. Here is where the line between man and legend blurs completely. Bjorn Ironside, 2 spears in his chest, bleeding onto the ground, looked up at his men, and made a decision. The sagas say he thought of Valhalla. The Norse afterlife was not a place of rest. It was a warrior's paradise, but paradise defined by Viking values. Endless feasting, endless battle, dying gloriously in combat, and being chosen by Odin's Valkyries to fight in the final war at Ragnarok. To reach Valhalla, you had to die in battle with a weapon in your hand. Not in bed, not from sickness, not from a wound that took you slowly. In battle, fighting, and Bjorn Ironside was not dead yet. He grabbed the spear shafts, both of them, and broke them off. Shorter now, still embedded in him, but no longer dragging. He found his sword. He called for his horse. His men, watching this, did not speak. They just moved. They made a path. He mounted, and he rode. What happened next is one of the most extraordinary moments in Viking history. The enemy saw him coming. They knew who he was. They had watched him fall. They had seen the spears go in. And now he was riding toward them, alone, sword raised, eyes forward. The front rank of the enemy line, men who had held against Viking charges. Men who had fought in this battle for hours and were still standing, broke. Not the whole army at once. The front rank first. Then the second rank saw the front rank running. And they ran too. Then the third. The entire enemy formation collapsed from the front backward. Like a wall falling, men throwing down weapons, turning, fleeing, in the face of a single wounded man on a horse. Bjorn's men charged into the gap. The battle that had been lost turned. The Vikings won. Bjorn Ironside died shortly after. The spear wounds were too deep. No man survives 2 spears through the chest. Not for long. He died on the battlefield, weapon in hand, exactly as he had always said he would. The Valkyries came for him, if you believe the sagas. Odin's chosen warrior women, riding across the battlefield, selecting the greatest fallen warriors for Valhalla. Whether you believe that or not, what happened on that battlefield is not mythology. It is documented. It is real. A dying man stood up, mounted his horse, and charged an army. And the army ran. Let's put this in context, because the context makes it even more extraordinary. Military history is full of last stands. Thermopylae, the Alamo, Rorke's Drift, 300 Spartans holding a mountain pass for 3 days, 189 men holding a Texas fort for 13 days. These are stories of men who held their ground and died fighting. Glorious, real, worth remembering. But Bjorn's final charge was different. It was not a last stand. It was a last attack. He didn't hold ground. He took ground. Dying. With 2 spears in him. He took ground. And the psychological effect of it on his own men and on his enemies was unlike anything a last stand produces. Because a last stand tells you, these men will die before they retreat. Bjorn's final charge told his enemies something different. It told them, these men do not accept death as a reason to stop fighting. There is no tactical manual for that. There is no formation that holds against a man who doesn't recognize that the battle should already be over for him. The enemy didn't run because Bjorn was winning. They ran because he was still there. So what does this tell us? It tells us that the Viking understanding of death was not just a religious belief. It was a tactical weapon. The Norse relationship with Valhalla, with dying well, dying fighting, was not just spiritual comfort for men afraid of the end. It was a psychological technology, a system for producing warriors who could function past the point, where any rational calculation of self-preservation would say, stop. Bjorn Ironside didn't stop. Not when his father died. Not when the walls of Luna wouldn't open. Not when the spears went in. He had been built, by culture, by training, by belief, into a man for whom stopping was simply not in the available options. That is what made him Ironside. Not his armor, his mind. Bjorn Ironside died as a king. He was buried, according to the sagas, in a burial mound, with his weapons and his treasures, sent into whatever comes next with everything a warrior needed. His sons ruled after him. His name survived in the oral tradition for generations, before it was ever written down. And when it was finally written, in the sagas, in the chronicles, in the Anglo-Saxon records that grudgingly acknowledged the scale of what the Great Heathen Army had done, the story of the final charge was always there, always the same, a dead man who refused to be dead, an army that ran from a ghost, a warrior who rode to Valhalla on his own terms. Here is what I want to leave you with. Every culture has a story about how a person should face the end. Some say, accept it gracefully. Some say, fight until you can't. Some say, make your peace. Some say, rage against it. The Vikings said something specific. They said, make sure Odin is watching. Make sure that whatever you do at the end, whatever the last thing is, it is worth telling, worth singing about around a fire, worth carving into stone. Bjorn Ironside made it worth carving into stone. He made it worth telling 1,000 years later. To you, right now. So here's the question. When your moment comes, and it will come in whatever form it takes, what will you do with the last thing you have left? Leave your answer below. And if you want to go deeper into the Viking world, there is a story coming about Ragnar Lothbrok's death, and what his sons did next that makes the Great Heathen Army look like just the beginning. That story is darker, bigger, and even more impossible. Don't go anywhere. Cross swords,